What if I told you the biggest force shaping your future isn't your dreams, your education, or even the opportunities that come your way, but the small things you do when nobody notices? It's not the grand goals you post about online, not the once-in-a-lifetime chances you wait for. It's the quiet, almost invisible repetitions, the way you start your morning, how you respond when stress hits, what you reach for when you're bored. That's the silent power of habits. Welcome to The Long Game. I'm Nathan, and today we're peeling back the curtain on something deceptively simple, but profoundly powerful. Habits. They're the autopilot of your life, running quietly in the background, deciding more about your destiny than any single decision you make. Let's picture it this way. Imagine you're on a giant ship sailing across an ocean. If the captain adjusts the course by just 1 degree, you won't notice much in the first few miles. The ocean around you looks the same. But travel far enough, and that 1 degree difference takes you to a completely different continent. Habits are those tiny adjustments. They don't look like much today, but across months, years, decades, they quietly carry you toward a destiny you may not even realize you're building. Take 2 people starting at the same point. Person A decides to exercise for 10 minutes a day. Person B decides to sit on the couch and watch another episode. 10 minutes. That's nothing, right? But imagine that repeated over 5 years. Person A has built stamina, confidence, and energy. Person B is now heavier, more sluggish, perhaps battling health problems. The starting difference was tiny. The final outcomes? Worlds apart. That's the compounding nature of habits. Just like compound interest with money, the earlier you start and the longer you let it run, the bigger the gap grows. And here's the paradox. Because the change is so small in the short term, we often ignore it. We don't feel the benefits of one healthy meal, so we shrug. We don't feel the damage of one cigarette, so we excuse it. But time is the magnifier. Time is the multiplier. And time never lies. Now, here's something fascinating. Neuroscientists tell us that habits form because our brain is always trying to save energy. Your brain is a prediction machine, and when it notices you repeat an action often enough, it says, "Oh, I know this one. Let's automate it." That's why you can drive home without even remembering the turns you made. That's why you find yourself checking your phone without thinking. The brain loves habits because they reduce effort. But what's convenient for the brain can be dangerous for the life you want. If you're not careful, you'll automate the wrong patterns, and those patterns will quietly pull you off course. Think of habits as invisible scripts. They are the backstage crew running the show of your life. You might be the actor on stage, but the crew decides where the lights shine, when the curtain falls, and how the audience experiences the story. Your habits set the stage for your destiny. And because they're invisible, they're easy to ignore, until the consequences become visible, when it's too late. Here's the mistake most people make. They wait for a big change. They say, when I get a new job, when I move to a new city, when the new year comes around, that's when I'll change. But destiny doesn't respond to declarations. It responds to daily repetitions. If your habits don't change, your future doesn't change. Let me ask you, what's the first thing you do when you wake up? Do you reach for your phone? Or do you take a breath, stretch, and begin your day with intention? That single choice sets the tone for hours to come. It may feel insignificant, but repeated 365 mornings in a row, it shapes your mind, your focus, even your emotional resilience. Now imagine this at scale. One habit doesn't just influence one area of life, it spills over. Reading every night doesn't just make you smarter. It gives you more ideas at work. It makes conversations richer. It boosts your confidence. On the other hand, staying up late scrolling doesn't just make you tired. It makes you irritable. It weakens your willpower. It affects your relationships. A habit is never isolated. It's a ripple that spreads wider than you think. The danger is this: most of our habits were never consciously chosen. We drift into them. Maybe you picked up late-night snacking because your family did. Maybe you reach for sugar whenever you're stressed because that was the coping mechanism modeled for you. The brain doesn't care if it's good or bad. It only cares if it's easy and repeated. And so most people live on autopilot, never questioning the invisible codes that are writing their future. But here's the opportunity. If habits can silently destroy, they can also silently transform. The same force that keeps you stuck can also set you free. If you learn how to take control of these invisible powers, you can redesign your destiny, not in one dramatic leap, but in steady, quiet steps. Over the next parts, we'll explore the psychology behind how habits form, why they are so sticky, and the strategies you can use to bend them in your favor. We'll look at stories of people who turned their lives around, not through massive revolutions, but through steady, quiet routines. And I'll show you why focusing on habits is more reliable than focusing on motivation, willpower, or even raw talent. Because in the end, your habits are your future in disguise. The question is, what future are you silently building? Stay with me as we dive deeper into the invisible architecture of habits and discover how this quiet force is shaping your destiny right now. Let's step deeper into the hidden architecture of habits. If part 1 gave us the big picture, the idea that tiny routines accumulate like compound interest, now we need to understand how these habits actually form and why they hold such stubborn power over our lives. Psychologists often talk about something called the habit loop. It's a 3-part cycle that explains almost every automatic behavior you repeat. Cue, routine, reward. First, there's a cue, a trigger, something that tells your brain, hey, it's time to start this pattern. Then comes the routine, the action itself, whether it's good or bad. Finally, there's the reward, the payoff your brain receives, which teaches it to repeat the behavior next time the cue appears. Picture this. You're sitting at your desk and your phone buzzes. That vibration is the cue. Without even thinking, you grab the phone and check your notifications. That's the routine. You see a like, a message, or some new piece of information. That's the reward. Your brain feels a tiny hit of dopamine, and the loop is reinforced. Repeat that 100 times, and suddenly you've built a habit of constantly checking your phone. You didn't set out to create it. It just formed, quietly, because the brain loves to connect cues with rewards. Now, the fascinating part is this. Your brain doesn't just crave the reward. Over time, it begins to crave the cue. That's why smokers feel the urge just by seeing a lighter. That's why people crave popcorn the moment they walk into a movie theater, even if they weren't hungry before. The brain wires the cue and the routine together so tightly, it feels almost impossible to separate them. But here's where it gets powerful. If you understand the loop, you can redesign it. You don't have to destroy a habit completely. You can swap the routine, keep the cue, keep the reward, but change what happens in the middle. For example, if stress is your cue and eating junk food is the routine, the reward might be comfort. You can't erase stress, and you'll always need comfort, but you can change the routine, take a walk, call a friend, breathe deeply, and still earn that same reward. Over time, the brain rewires itself. Habits, in a sense, are the brain's shortcut. They're energy savers. The brain uses up an enormous amount of energy each day. To survive, it automates as much as it can.
That's why half of the actions you take daily are habitual, not deliberate. You're not choosing them consciously. They're happening in the background. Think about that. Half of your life is run by routines you probably didn't even design. Half of your destiny is being shaped without you noticing. That's both scary and liberating. Scary because it means if you don't wake up to it, you may spend years running patterns that lead you somewhere you never intended. Liberating because if you do wake up, if you take control, you can deliberately shape those patterns and thereby reshape your future. Let's make this more concrete. Consider the habit of saving money. Imagine every time you get paid, the cue is the deposit hitting your account. Your old routine might be to spend first, and whatever is left at the end of the month goes into savings. The reward is the short-term pleasure of buying. But if you flip the routine, if the moment money hits, you automate a transfer to savings or investment, you still get a reward. In fact, over time, the reward grows even bigger. Security, freedom, opportunity. You didn't change the cue. You didn't erase the need for pleasure. You just rewired the loop so the routine points toward your long-term destiny instead of instant gratification. Now, here's something subtle but crucial. Habits are identity in motion. Every time you repeat a behavior, you're casting a vote for the kind of person you believe you are. If you run every morning, you're not just someone who runs, you're a runner. If you write every day, you're not just scribbling words, you're a writer. And the opposite holds true. Skip enough workouts, and your brain begins to see you as someone who isn't disciplined. Keep breaking promises to yourself, and your identity becomes someone who can't be trusted, even by you. This is why habits feel so sticky. They're not just actions, they're evidence. They're proof points your brain collects to decide, who am I really? And identity is powerful. Once you believe something about yourself, you fight to stay consistent with it. That's why the most effective way to change isn't to say, I want to run a marathon, but to say, I am a runner. Goals are external. Identity is internal. Habits are the bridge that connect them. Let me give you another image. Imagine your life as a giant block of marble, and your habits are the sculptor's chisel. Every day, the chisel strikes, tiny chips, barely noticeable. But over months and years, the sculpture emerges. If your habits are careless, the sculpture becomes something crude, shapeless. If your habits are deliberate, the sculpture becomes art. And you are both the marble and the sculptor. But here's the problem. We often underestimate how stubborn habits are. Think of a river. Over time, water carves deep channels into rock, directing its flow. Habits are the channels of your brain. The longer the habit has been running, the deeper the channel. That's why breaking an old habit feels like swimming upstream. It takes enormous energy. But if you persist, you can carve a new channel, a new groove, one that redirects the flow in your favor. The old path may always be there, but with practice, the water, the energy of your life, can be trained to flow where you want it to go. This is why willpower alone rarely works. Willpower is like a sprint. It burns out quickly. Habits, on the other hand, are endurance. They conserve energy by making good choices automatic. That's why people who rely only on motivation often fail. Motivation rises and falls like the tide. But habits, once locked in, keep you moving even when motivation disappears. So the real question is not, how motivated are you today? The real question is, what automatic systems have you built that will carry you even on the days when you don't feel like showing up? In the next part, we'll explore the mechanics of building new habits that actually stick and breaking old ones that hold you back. We'll look at why starting small is more powerful than aiming for huge change, how to use habit stacking to anchor new routines to old ones, and why environment often matters more than willpower. Because if you can learn to design the invisible loops running your life, you'll no longer be a prisoner of your routines. You'll become the architect of them. And when you become the architect of your habits, you become the architect of your destiny.
We've now established that habits operate on loops: cue, routine, reward, and that they shape not only our actions, but also our identity. The next question is, how do we actually build the right habits and break the ones holding us back? This is where the invisible power of small routines becomes crystal clear. The mistake most people make when trying to change is going too big, too fast. They decide, I'm going to start running 5 miles every day, or I'm going to stop eating sugar forever. The energy of motivation pushes them for a week, maybe 2. But motivation, as we've seen, is like a wave. It rises, it crashes, it disappears. And when it's gone, the new habit collapses. The truth is, habits stick not because they're big, but because they're small enough to repeat consistently. James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, famously said, "You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." And systems are built from tiny actions that feel almost too small to matter. Think of it like planting seeds. If you want a forest, you don't plant a single giant tree. You start with tiny seeds, almost invisible. Day to day, they don't look like much. But with care and time, they grow roots, then trunks, then branches, until one day you stand beneath an entire forest that began with actions so small you could barely see them. So if you want to build habits that last, start small. Want to read more? Don't start with a goal of finishing 1 book a week. Start with a goal of reading 1 page a night. Want to meditate? Don't set out for an hour. Start with 2 minutes of breathing. Want to exercise? Don't demand 50 push-ups. Start with 1 push-up. The key is consistency, not intensity. Once the habit is established, it naturally expands. There's a principle in habit science called habit stacking. It's one of the simplest but most effective strategies for change. The idea is this: instead of trying to create a habit in isolation, you anchor it to something you already do. For example, after I brush my teeth, I will floss 1 tooth. Or, after I pour my morning coffee, I will write down 1 thing I'm grateful for. By linking a new behavior to an old one, you piggyback on existing cues. The brain loves patterns, and once it recognizes the anchor, the new routine becomes automatic. Let's make this practical. Imagine you want to build a journaling habit. Every morning, you already make tea or coffee. That's the cue. The routine you want is journaling. The reward is clarity and peace of mind. So you tell yourself, after I pour my coffee, I open my notebook. You keep the notebook right next to the coffee machine. No friction, no resistance. Within a few weeks, your brain fuses those actions together. Coffee equals notebook. And before long, you don't even think about it. It just happens. This brings us to an often overlooked truth. Environment matters more than willpower. You don't rise above your environment. You are shaped by it. If the cookies are on the counter, you'll eat them. If your running shoes are by the door, you're more likely to run. We like to think of ourselves as creatures of discipline, but most of the time we're creatures of convenience. So the smartest move isn't to rely on grit. It's to design your surroundings to make good habits easier and bad habits harder. Think of it as friction.
If you want to break a habit, increase the friction. Want to watch TV less? Unplug the TV and put the remote in a drawer. The tiny extra effort makes the routine less automatic. Want to check your phone less? Keep it in another room while you work. Want to read more? Put a book on your pillow so you can't go to bed without picking it up. Change the environment and you change the odds. And here's something powerful. When building habits, celebrate the small wins. Your brain needs rewards to reinforce routines, so don't wait for the huge outcome. Smile when you finish your workout. Check off the habit in a tracker. Tell yourself, yes, I'm becoming the person I want to be. The act of acknowledgement turns repetition into reinforcement. It transforms habits from chores to identity. Let me share a story. A man once wanted to lose weight, but instead of setting a huge goal, he began by simply going to the gym every day for 5 minutes. He didn't even work out. He just showed up, stayed for 5 minutes, and left. Ridiculous, right? But here's the genius. By showing up, he built the identity of, I am the kind of person who goes to the gym. Once that was established, the routine naturally grew. He started staying longer, exercising more. Over time, he lost over 100 pounds, not because he forced himself into massive change, but because he honored the power of small, consistent routines. This is the invisible power of habits. They grow in the background, silently multiplying. You don't notice the change until one day you wake up and realize you're living inside a completely different life. It wasn't a revolution, it was evolution, one repetition at a time. So let me ask you, what are the small routines in your life right now that are compounding for or against you? Are you slowly building the future you want, or are you quietly sabotaging yourself? Remember, the direction matters more than the speed. A tiny habit done daily is far more powerful than a giant change that burns out after a week. In the next part, we'll explore the other side of the coin, breaking bad habits. Because while building good routines is essential, the real transformation often comes from removing the invisible anchors that are silently pulling you backwards. We'll look at why bad habits are so sticky, how to dismantle their triggers, and how to replace them with patterns that actually serve you. Because habits aren't just about doing more good, they're also about subtracting the hidden behaviors that quietly steal your destiny.